to. And welcome to Central Reform Congregation.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Before I start, I want to acknowledge your new year. Happy New Year. And I hope you're having a great Yom Kippur so far. And for those of you who are fasting, I wish you an easy fast today and in the holiday season. Thank you for having me. I'm Shima Rostami, Director of Gateway Human Trafficking, which is a nonprofit organization in the greater St. Louis area. I can double hear myself. Is it me or is it your system? Is that sound system works for you?
We can hear you fine. The volume's loud
Okay,
in our
good.
sanctuary.
Oh, okay.
It's not on your end, it's our
Um,
end.
okay. Would you like me to continue?
We definitely would love for you to continue. And the issue is that you can only hear one of us if we're speaking into a microphone. So I'm assuming you
Okay,
could hear me now, and
that is correct.
we are eager to hear what you have to tell us.
Okay. Um, so the year 2022 in the international world is named as Use and Abuse of Technology Concerning Anti-Human Trafficking World. So what happened, unfortunately, during the COVID-19 pandemic, traffickers very quickly learned and updated their systems to engage online technology, including social media apps, various websites to engage and exploit vulnerable people, especially children and youth. For that reason, international society and the world has selected the year 2022 as a year we talk about the use and abuse of technology concerning human trafficking and anti-human trafficking work. So, with that being said, let's just talk about the issue. There was a pre-post course and post-course evaluation, which I assume that you may not be able to fill it out, which is fine. With that being said, let's start to talk about focus the human trafficking, what human trafficking is. So we have a legal definition in the international world and also within the United States about human trafficking. And every individual states they have their own legal advocacies, legal laws concerning human trafficking. In the United States, in the federal body, we have Victim Protection Act of 2000 that protects victims of human trafficking, which is very interesting. The story behind the Victim Protection Act of 2000, it means that before the year 2000, we even didn't have any law in the United States as a federal standard to fight against human trafficking. Additionally, states, individual states in the United States, they didn't have human trafficking law. So a little bit about the history, because I believe that it is important to know the history, the movement in order to be able to understand the problem and fight against it. So what happened back in 1970s, early 1970s, there was a farm in one of the states. I'm not guessing the states. I apologize. I forgot about which state it was. Um, there was a farm that in that farm they were two men in their mid 50 and mid 60s, both of them individuals with disabilities, that they were exploited for about 15 years in that farm. So they were working, and the exploitation was labor exploitation, as a matter of fact. So they were working every day, 7 days a week, for about 15 hours per day with no pay, or sometimes they were paid only a couple of hours, a couple of dollars during the week for the work they had done. In addition to the excessive hours they were working, the farmers had really bad behavior toward them, it was some verbal abuse against them as well. And the farmers were abusing them due to their condition, that they were individuals with disabilities. Finally, one of the other people who was working at the farm, he got tired, and that the farmer and other people on the farm were abusing and exploiting these two men. So what he does, he report the situation to the county government of the time, and just ask them to send inspectors to just make a report and inspect what is going on in the farm concerning those two men. So the county sends the relative or relevant inspector to make an inspection in the farm to see what is going on concerning the situation, the report they received. And shortly enough, they found the two men in a very bad condition. They took them out of the situation. They tried to provide them help. So the county prosecutors tried to bring a case against the farmers in the county level, which didn't go anywhere because they announced that at the time there were not any standards in the local level to actually hold the farmers and the farm accountable for what happened to those two men. Then they tried to make it a state case. It didn't work out. So after a couple of years, the U.S. attorney of the time in that state, it was, okay, I remember, it was the state of Michigan. It was Eastern District, U.S. Attorney, Eastern District of Michigan, in late 1970s tried to bring the case to the federal, and try the case, prosecute the case at the federal level. The same story happened. After a couple of years working on that, the case goes up to the Supreme Court of the United States. This is a case actually made a history in the United States history of the U.S. Supreme Court. After years, even the U.S. Supreme Court put the case down, and they said, well, the situation these men were in was terrible. There is no question, no comment about that. But currently, there is not any standard in the federal body of the United States that we could do anything regarding the exploitation was going on concerning these two men. By the time we are about 1983 to 1985, around that time, and it was a time that the case which made a history in the United States had enough advocates interested all around the United States to lobby Congress and ask about more protection for workers, especially in these kind of situations, exploitations of human beings. Finally, it was around the year 2000 that Congress passed Victim Protection Act of 2000, which serves as the only human trafficking law we have in the federal government concerning human trafficking. Then I would say that it was about 2003, 5, and 7. The states movements started against human trafficking, and different states in the U.S. Um, started to have and establish their own internal laws concerning human trafficking. Two things very interesting, especially for me, which is the only federal law we have, which is Victim Protection Act of 2000, came out of the one labor trafficking case to individuals with disabilities. However, today is the year 2022, and in the field, we have seen the least support for both labor human trafficking and individuals with disabilities, that they have been targeted by traffickers oftentimes and frequently compared to other vulnerabilities. And I'm going to shortly share with you why individuals with disabilities have been even more vulnerable to be targeted by human traffickers. So let's just provide, it was the history background of the movement. I thought it is important for all of you to know about it, because it helps us always in any social criminal issues in our communities, to just know a little bit background about the movement, where it started, how it started, where we are standing now. With that being said, let's just talk about some of the misconceptions, popular misconceptions I hear in our communities about human trafficking. Unfortunately, human trafficking is one of the most marginalized issues in the criminal justice system in our communities. People have heard about the terminology human trafficking, child trafficking, but sadly and oftentimes they do not have accurate information about human trafficking. They just heard the name, heard the terminology, they just talk about it, and oftentimes they talk about the misconceptions just going on in it. Now, I'm going to ask a question. You don't have to answer me. I want you to answer that question in your minds. When I tell the word human trafficking, think about it. What movie, what story comes to your mind? Oftentimes, when I ask this question from everyone, usually people talk about the movie Taken. And they said that, oh, it was the first time I ever heard about human trafficking. Although the movie Taken is very popular, action movie, well made, people like it, but Taken exhibits only a small amounts of the human trafficking situations we have in our communities. Some of the misunderstandings we have is that people think that human trafficking requires transportation or passing the international boundaries. This is what Taken present to people. However, friends, in order for a human trafficking situation happens, we actually do not need any movement, meaning that people can be exploited and trafficked in their houses, because right now traffickers are engaging online technology to actually traffic vulnerable people, especially children. So the movement, passing any kind of boundaries, doesn't matter, international boundaries, state boundaries, local boundaries, counties boundaries, is not required. One person can be trafficked in their houses without even walking steps from their door, their house door, or some people can be trafficked between the counties. In our area, it's not uncommon to have victims to be trafficked from St. Louis City to county, St. Charles, even some other counties, neighboring counties, or even traffickers use our area sometimes to bring victims around, but it's not necessarily, because they can continue exploiting a victim in our own neighborhoods, zip codes, and the same house. The other misconceptions we hear a lot is that people think human trafficking involves a violent crime. Human trafficking actually happen oftentimes without even having a violent crime involved. And that's because traffickers are engaging psychological manipulation or coercion more and more to convince victims to engage in those commercial sex acts or labor servitude that they want to do. The other issues is that I just shared with you the story about labor trafficking. The only human trafficking law we have in the federal law established from with labor trafficking case, but unfortunately, people only see sex trafficking as a form of human trafficking. Sex trafficking is happening around us, but I can tell you from experience working in the field, if labor trafficking incidents are not more than sex trafficking incidents around us, are not less than sex trafficking. Because we haven't spoke about it, because the community is in denial that labor trafficking is happening, it doesn't mean it does not happen in our communities. Sadly and unfortunately, one of the other issues I hear is about immigration issues. I can't tell you how many times I participate in different gatherings, community presentations, that some people in that program have a negative attitude regarding immigrants and very bluntly and openly blame immigrants, especially undocumented immigrants. This is what they quote as the problem concerning human trafficking in the United States. So let's talk about it a little bit more. According to National Human Trafficking Hotline Data Center, about 83% of victims of human trafficking in the United States have been US citizens. This leaves us with about 17% of the other population, who we can call them with immigration background. From those 17%, something around 10 to 11% have been in the United States with legal documentation, including F visas, which is a student visa, J visas, which is research visa, visitor visas, HB visas, work visas. Then the remaining other category of undocumented immigrants that they have been victims of human trafficking in the United States is about roughly 6 to 7. Which additionally, I want to bring it to your attention that 6 to 7% undocumented immigrants in the United States, they are victims of trafficking. Meaning that they did not want this happen to them. Usually and oftentimes, traffickers bring them illegally to the United States for the purpose of trafficking them, or they found them as vulnerable target at the borders, and it's the moment they start trafficking them because of so many issues concerning their situations. So the argument that immigrants or immigration is the issue in the United States concerning human trafficking doesn't have any common ground, because I can tell you, according to National Human Trafficking Hotline number, over 90% of victims of human trafficking in the United States are either US citizens, green card holders, or individuals with legal documentation, including different visa categories in the United States. So if, rather than considering the big pictures of victims of human trafficking, we just put the blame on undocumented immigrants, meaning that we are narrowing the population of victims to a small group in our communities. Lastly, one of the other main misconceptions I hear is that oftentimes people think only women and girls are victims of human trafficking in our community. And that is because culturally, we have provided information from different sources that men and boys cannot be victims of human trafficking, sexual assaults, rapes, abuse, and these types of crimes. Although the majority of identified victims of human trafficking have been women and girls, but it does not mean that boys and men cannot be victims of human trafficking, or it doesn't mean that they are victims at a lower level. All it says that it actually provides a huge gap in the data we have from identified cases. Again, the information we have available to us is based on identified cases of human trafficking. And we know for sure that the human trafficking problem is huge, and there are so many cases every year goes unreported in our community. So I invite all of us to just um, see the big picture concerning human trafficking, populations, ways of recruitment, control, power, which we are going to talk about it today more. So now I'm going to provide you a little bit information about human trafficking in the state of Missouri. The latest data we have from National Human Trafficking Hotline Center, which is in 2020, which actually was the heart of pandemic, 2020. So the number of child trafficking cases increased in the state of Missouri during the pandemic by 31.6 percent. It means that 1 in 3 trafficking victims were children in Missouri. And consider the fact that often, in almost all around Missouri, as well as the United States, schools were closed. However, as you see, traffickers found their way not only continue the exploitation of youth and children in our states and everywhere else in the world and in the United States, they also increased the victimization in our communities. So Missouri, based on that data in 2020, Missouri constitutes the 13th 1-3 highest signal volume in the 50 states, including Washington D.C. in 2020, concerning human trafficking situations. From Polaris, which is a nonprofit organization, work closely with National Human Trafficking Hotline Center, which actually get the data from the hotline, convert that to graphs, reports. Polaris said that in the same period, which is 2020, online recruitment increased a significant number, which is by 22%. And then Facebook and Instagram were identified as the hot or popular sites for recruitment for traffickers, which was 120%. With that being said, I don't want you to be scared or be very afraid of engaging in technology, because at the same period of time, reporting of human trafficking incidents increased via using the same platforms, which is Facebook and Instagram, by 125%. All I want to say is that not only online technology being used for recruitment, but also it's been used for fighting against human trafficking in our area. For that reason, it is important for us as community members, as parents, as grandparents, as teachers, as service providers, as a community member, be alert and know about various ways that, first of all, we can identify human trafficking. Second of all, we can make a report, which actually online technology has been one of those platforms. So we talked about all of these information about what is new concerning the data in our state, about the misconceptions, but let's talk a little bit more focusedly about human trafficking, because I want you to actually have a great knowledge about what is human trafficking and what we as anti-human trafficking people or experts experience to establish a human trafficking case. Unfortunately, it is not unpopular for people who do not know exactly about the issue, about the process, what we need to go through to establish a situation as a human trafficking, to just get excited, go out, and say, oh, we had these many numbers of human trafficking situations in our area or in our county, or we just had a case that we had 8, 10, 20 victims of human trafficking. I am very careful about using this information, because sometimes what we see as human trafficking situation, actually it's not going to be a human trafficking situation case, because We see the signs, we see the risk factors. To us, this is human trafficking, but in order to make it 100% a human trafficking situation, we need to check so many elements, so many issues. We need to present that, we need to go through the process and establish those standards to make it a human trafficking situation. So there are some elements in order to establish a human trafficking situation. In order to establish a human trafficking situation at the court of law, according to federal standard and different states standard, we need to establish acts, means, and purposes of human trafficking. So acts of human trafficking are defined by law, and those are the acts of traffickers, which are I'm just naming some of them that are popular, unified, usually in federal law and state laws: recruiting, harboring, moving, and obtaining of the person through force, fraud, or coercion, which are the means of human trafficking, for the purpose of labor servitude or commercial sex acts. I'm going to open it up again. All it means that because we see something and we think it is human trafficking, not necessarily is going to be human trafficking. Usually, a process of establishing a human trafficking case, documentation, providing evidence, it takes about 2 years in average in the court of law to actually establish a human trafficking case. The job of service providers, law enforcement, prosecutors are very important and critical in this process. Sometimes even I call service providers, law enforcement, and prosecutors in human trafficking cases artists, psychologists, educators, so many things. So if you want to actually work as one of these professionals in the field of human trafficking, trust me, you have to be so many things in order to do it. Because oftentimes the only evidence we have to make the case to prove this exploitation is testimony and testifying of the victims in the court of law in front of their traffickers. And oftentimes, sadly, due to the trauma victims experience, due to so many circumstances, victims are not ready or they don't want to collaborate with law enforcement, prosecutors, and service providers to testify in the court. And it leaves us, the absences of enough evidence in the court leaves us to go by whatever evidence we have in the situation to establish it, the crime or any crime against traffickers. Sometimes we have evidence of other crimes, including murder, drug issues, illegal trade of gun, or other, again, criminal activities that we have enough evidence to establish that, and we have to go by that. So it was a brief explanation. I wanted everyone knows that it is very immature. As soon as we see something, we just say it's a human trafficking, because human trafficking is an ongoing exploitation and abuse. We had a case that the survivor got to be a trafficking victim when she was, and when she was navigating her situation, what was going on, she names the count, the number 24,000, and she says it was the number of times she was raped while she was a child trafficking victim. So with that being said, do we have the video that we could share?
I think we're checking.
Okay,
Yep. 1 second.
perfect. Can you
Good
please
now.
play that for audience?
Sure.
Thank you.
Oh, which video, Shima?
It was about the survivor that I sent earlier today.
They're tracking it down.
Okay.
not sure if you're going to be able to see it, but we'll let you know if you can.
No, that's okay. If you can see, just tell me when it's done.
Okay, hold on. Okay, there. Okay, that one's Jesse's.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we have another speaker who has video, so we're tracking yours down.
That wasn't the life that I had planned for myself. And I get so emotional because I had so many dreams. I had so many goals. There were so many things that I wanted to do. Never in a million years did I think I'd be a trafficking victim as a teen. At 16, I started selling nude photos on the internet to men who pestered me for new content. As a gay teen living with a mentally ill mother, I was hungry for attention. I eventually had to run away and started selling sex full time. I was controlled by traffickers and pimps. I was forced to trade my body for food and shelter just to survive.
It is expected that there are thousands of boys and male victims of sex trafficking in our communities. In fact, recent studies show boys and young men are being exploited at much higher rates. Unfortunately, oftentimes, boys and male victims of human trafficking go unseen and unhelped. Guilt, shame, and stigma, combined with a world that has trouble seeing boys and young men as trafficking victims, especially gay and trans youth and boys of color, have made these victims remain silent and not receive the help they need to recover from the trauma they experienced through the human trafficking situation. Remember, education and raising community awareness is the best way to fight against human trafficking. If you suspect someone might be in a trafficking situation, call the National Human Trafficking Hotline at 888-373-7888. Don't let human traffickers take advantage of your loved ones. To find out more, visit gatewayhumantrafficking.org.
So that was a story of a real human trafficking survivor. The reason I wanted you to see that, number one, is the coercion. Oftentimes, our community members are not aware of the vulnerabilities of people, especially vulnerable youth from LGBTQ plus communities that they are targeted oftentimes in our area by human traffickers. More and more, we see cases that human traffickers are engaging coercion or psychological manipulation to exploit our victims and survivors. What it means that we have a teen who's suffering from some situations, family situations, that they need to find a resource to just survive their lives. They may be from a background of poverty. They may be from LGBTQ plus community that their family community don't approve of their situations, and they end up being runaway youth. So all of those circumstances put them in a situation that they even rely on traffickers for food, clothes, shelter, the necessary item that any human being needs to survive. And all of these situations are very harming our community, especially vulnerable children and youth. And traffickers are there. Traffickers are there to find these vulnerable populations and befriend them, groom them, and coerce them to do those activities for them. The other issue is that trafficking victims do not have consent to the activities they do. So sometimes we may have initial consent, but at any time that the survivor and victim does not want to continue those trafficking, those activities considered to be a trafficking victim. Another important thing is about an exception, which is the average age. The minimum age. So let's just have a quick review. We said human trafficking is harboring, recruiting, obtaining of a person, or moving of a person for the purpose, through force, fraud, coercion, for the purpose of commercial sex acts or labor servitude. And we said that traffickers oftentimes use coercion or psychological manipulation to have these vulnerable populations to do labor servitude or commercial sex acts. And oftentimes we don't see traffickers anymore use force or use fraud in many cases, especially in sex trafficking cases. The reason for that is because traffickers need or want to have the most profit they can make out of a human being with developing and producing the least evidence against them. Think about it. If someone want to put a trafficker want to put a victim in a chain, it's possible that when we find them, there are evidence, physical evidence of enchaining the individual. So it's physical evidence, very clear, firm evidence against traffickers. So it's better for traffickers not to use chain, not to use physical force. Fraud. Imagine that there is a fraud intentionally. The trafficker promised something on paper to the victim, but actually in reality they are not abide by that promise, which we are able to prove the fraud. It's going to be a clear evidence against trafficker. So a trafficker who doesn't want to be arrested, be convicted for human trafficking, they are trying to use something rather than fraud so that there is the least evidence against them. So for that reason, we said traffickers oftentimes use coercion or psychological manipulation to have survivors and victims of trafficking do the activities for them. And there is an exception. What it means that when in that long process of a couple of years, we are going to establish a human trafficking situation in the court, we need to establish solid evidence to prove the existence of force, fraud, coercion in the case. What it does, it proves that that victim of trafficking did not want to engage in those commercial sex acts or labor servitude. There was someone else or another group of people behind them to have them engage in those activities. So the exception is the magic age of 18 for sex kingdoms. The law, Victim Protection Act of 2000, actually provides a special protection for minors who are engaged in commercial sex acts or knowing as sex trafficking only. What it means is that if we are working in a case of sex trafficking and the victim is a minor, an individual under the age of 18, we actually do not have to prove the existence of force, fraud, coercion. Only having the purpose of trafficking, which is commercial sex acts or labor servitude, to be able to connect that to the acts of traffickers, meaning that we need to be able to prove the so-called traffickers recruited these youth, minor under the age of 18, or move them from this location for the purpose of selling them, or paid for the hotel, or paid for these services to make or facilitate the environment situation to sell or make money out of this youth, is enough to establish a sex trafficking case against the trafficker. Unfortunately, however, and unfortunately, this magic age of 18 does not um, protect working children or children who are potentially victims of labor trafficking for two important reasons. That we don't have enough support for working children, not only in the state of Missouri, in the United States. So we have a federal law, which is named Fair Labor Standard Act of 1938, that allows children as young as 12 or 14. The age is minimum age, legal age of working is different in different states. That act allows children work legally as young as, again, 12 or 14 different states, which actually make it more difficult for us as anti-human trafficking movement to fight against labor trafficking when we have concern about minors involved in the case. Practically, what does it mean practically? Practically, it means that in the state of Missouri, the minimum age for working children, meaning that in the state of Missouri, the minimum age for children to work legally is 14. What it means that standard of proving force, fraud, coercion for labor trafficking situation is 14 when we have minors in the case. Meaning that in order to establish a labor trafficking case, we still need to act children or minors between the age of 14 and 18 are adults when it comes to labor trafficking situations. There are so many issues concerning Fair Labor Standard Act of 1938. There are movements going on in the nation for years to update that law. I know Rabbi Susan, and I know that your congregation is a social justice congregation. So I'm just going to share with you that the Labor Act of 1938, when established, it was something they wanted to fight with minimum wage and create a standard back then for working people, working families, and working class of people in the United States. I was actually driving somewhere this weekend, and I was looking for listening to it was either NPR or it was St. Louis Public Radio channel. It was a really great documentary about minimum age, and they talked about Fair Labor Standard Act of 1938. It was very interesting how they opened that actually what promising movement was behind that act at the time. Because what happened, they wanted to create a standard for workers in 1938 around that time. But then the South, who had so many slaves, they had immigrants and African American communities working particularly in agriculture and farm for them. They did not want those populations have a good minimum um, paying wage for that. So what happened? They tried to put some other standard for that, including the minimum age, so that they still put some minority groups behind that. Because the issue is that it is still possible that if you just go around, especially in southern states, the majority of populations they are still working on the farm. They are either recent immigrants. I'm not talking about documentation. I'm talking about recent immigrants. Even agriculture is allowed to bring many workers to the country. But because of this Fair Labor Standard Act, they are able to bring even more younger people to work. And what happened when children at the age of 14, 15, rather than spending their time at a school, they are working, and this is legal. So it really harmed their physical and mental development. More specifically, the issues of our time is going to be marijuana lands. So think about what's going to happen to that child who is working at the age of 15, 16, 14, 10 hours or hours during weeks on marijuana lands, which is legal, by the way. So it really affects directly on their health, mental development, and again they don't have the opportunity to grow in an environment to receive a proper education, to be a homeowner, or have other proper uh, wage, and also circumstances that other children from different families and communities have. So, which means that again, those children and communities who are in poverty, they remain and stay in this cycle of abuse for generations. So for that reason, I really would like to ask you, all of you, each of you that has some interest, power, write to your policymakers, Congress people. There is another CARE Act pending in Congress for the past 20 years, which actually it is to increase the minimum age of children. It is that specific CARE Act that it's gonna revise Fair Labor Standard Act of 1938. And because agriculture and so many other industries have good lobbying, this CARE Act came to the floor of the Congress a couple of times, but sent back to the committee again for more review. I know that I was told I need to stop by 1:55 because your next speaker is coming, so I don't want to take more time. I can't hear you. Nope.
Talking to the microphone.
I can hear you now.
Oh, good. Okay, that was me. It was me. This is Rabbi Randy, and I know Rabbi Susan sends her regards. And we send you our appreciation for opening our eyes even wider, which is part of our journey on Yom Kippur is to know more and to feel more and to figure out how to ease suffering, especially when it comes to the suffering of our children. So I think you've given us information, but also some places we can go to be active, to make a difference. And we do have another speaker, but really want to make sure that you know. And is there a way that if anyone has a question or a follow-up, is there a way that people can connect with you?
Absolutely. I provide my email for Elena, and please feel free to share that with whoever has questions, comments. I would be more than happy to answer those questions.
So we'll do that. We'll spread around your email address, and
Thank you.
hope you keep feeling better and that you have a blessed day. And really, the work that you do couldn't be more crucial and important and holy. And we're glad that you're out there doing it. We hope we can be as much assistance as possible.
Thank you so much, Rabbi, for your kindness, providing this opportunity. Please keep praying for us, all activists in the anti-human trafficking world, and our victims and survivors and their families this holiday season.
We sure will. And everybody here is expressing their gratitude.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
If you could, yeah.
And
You
Happy
too.
New Year.
Thank you, Shima. Thank you. Blessings to you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I could probably